And I was quite amazed. I kept thinking, why aren't they teaching us this in medical school, or at least in our residencies or something? But we were trained to use surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, and the pharmaceuticals. So when I did the parasite cleansing and everything, I was a big guy. I was drinking a 6-pack of Coke every night to stay awake, to do deliveries and such. And I had gained a fair amount of weight, and I was 260 pounds when I started doing the parasite cleansing and all of the things to get rid of my cancer. I literally lost 40 pounds in 2 months, and all of the women in my practice noticed, and they'd say, "Dr. Werner, what are you doing to lose weight?" And I'd tell them, and they're like, "Well, we want to do that." So I started putting these women on parasite cleansing and different antifungals, different things like that. And my intuition would help me with what I was putting them on, and the women would lose weight. Now, I was an expert laparoscopist, which means I use a little tube to look in and diagnose what was going on, and most of them were women, so we were looking for either, you know, they were having pain in their belly, so we were looking for appendicitis or endometriosis, ovarian cysts, polycystic kidneys, bowel problems, uterine problems, uterine fibroids or tumors or whatever. And I would use a camera also, so we would video when I would diagnose what was going on, and then we would schedule them for the surgery to remove whatever the pathology was. Well, it was quite interesting, because when I started going in to do the surgeries, and these women had used parasite cleansing, antifungals, antivirals, and chelation, I'd go in to do the surgery to take care of the pathology, and the pathology would not be there. The endometriosis would be gone. The ovarian cysts would be gone. The problems with the uterus would be gone. And I was like, what in the heck is happening? And I came to find that a lot of these disorders are due to parasites, fungus, and virus, as well as cancers cause these things. And so I started treating women with the herbal treatments rather than the surgical treatments. And this, of course, got me in trouble with the hospitals, because I wasn't making the hospitals as much money. And so that started a whole new set of things in my life. And so I started asking for more assistance. And one of my prayers was, please, God, send me the best herbalist on the planet. Now, when I had that prayer, I didn't expect to have anything happen as fast as it did. But the next day, this guy showed up at my office, and he was working for one of the herbal companies, and he said, if you'll open an herb store, I'll move here and help you learn about the herbs. And so, you know, it was like an answer to a prayer. So I told him, okay, I'll do it. And so I had a space at my office. I had moved out into private practice and moved back to Cedar City, because that's where my wife at the time wanted to live. And we opened an herb store inside of my medical practice, and people would come to me and be diagnosed, and then I'd ask them, do you want to use the medical therapy or medical treatment, or do you want to use the alternative treatment? And if they'd said, and most people coming to me, they knew I used alternative stuff, so they'd say, well, we want to use alternative. So I'd walk them over to the herb store, and this guy, his name was Steve Hennenfent, he would teach me what herbs, and he used kinesiology, and he had a method where he would point to the different herbs, and he would gather the herbs up, then he'd test for the dosing of the herbs, using kinesiology and using strength testing on these clients. And by then I was taking care of men, women, and children, because a lot of people would come to me because they wanted alternative medicine. And he would test them and show me exactly, and then he'd teach about where these herbs came from, why they were used, what purposes they served, and why they worked. And it was very interesting hearing the origins, and these stories went back in time, you know, literally 1,000 years. He would talk about, yeah, in the 1500s, or in the year 200 BC, we would use these herbs for this and this, talking as if he had been there. And it kind of freaked me out a little bit the way he would talk, but it was actually as if he'd had a past life doing these things. And came to find out, he worked with me for 4.5 years, and in August 2001, he told me, I've taught you everything I can teach you. You're well versed in the herbs, and I've got to go to New York, so I'll be leaving you. And I was like, you hate big cities. And he said, yes, but the Spirit's telling me to go to New York City. And he moved to New York in August 2001 and left me, you know, I was well trained under him. And it was really interesting because a month later, 9/11 happened with the Twin Towers there in New York, and he was about 4 blocks away and helped many, many people during that period of time. I was still in communication with him. He had a cell phone at the time, you know, the old cell phones before the smartphones, and we would talk. If I had a question, he would answer. But it was really interesting because I was drawn to a book called Saint Germain and Alchemy, written by Mark and Claire Prophet. And in this book was a picture of Saint Germain. And I looked at that picture and I go, oh my gosh, this is Steve Hennenfeld. It looked exactly like him. And I called him up and I said, are you Saint Germain? And he did not say yes or no. He started telling me about how in the 1500s he was a count in Transylvania, and how he had grew up with Jesus's teachings, and he had followed Jesus's teachings to the point where he went through the ascension process. And I was just mesmerized about this story that he told me. And so I didn't, unbeknownst to me, Saint Germain had been working with me for 4.5 years. And so quite a fascinating story. And this was back in the mid-90s through 2001. And at the time, I was fighting the government quite a bit because they didn't like doctors, medical doctors, using alternative treatments. They wanted us to stick with the pharmaceutical program, the surgeries. And so I was getting lawsuits from the state of Utah and the United States government, and I actually won the first ones in civil court, and then they came after me criminally. And the U.S. Marshals came in, busted in my office, and forced everybody out. They took all my computers, they took all my equipment, my medical records, and I was unable to defend myself, and it was quite interesting. They started a whole process trying to incarcerate me, and I actually ended up serving. I moved down to St. George because they totally got a grand jury to indict me on 154 counts of insurance fraud, and so I moved down to St. George and continued fighting, but the government has unlimited funds, and so they just ran me out of money, and all the attorneys got turned against me, and so I ended up having to defend myself, and that's when I met Winston Shrout, and he started helping me, and we actually were beating the criminal prosecution of me, and the federal marshals busted into my office down in St. George and threw me in the back of a van, shackled and handcuffed, and took me off to prison. And when I was in prison, I'm sorry if I'm talking too much, but it's quite a story. I was total power. Yes. Yes. And when they took everything. Literally, I couldn't go back into my office, and I had paid big bucks to have that office and the herb store, and I was refused access. They took all my land, confiscated, they tried to confiscate the house of my ex-wife, but luckily I had transferred all of it into her name, so they couldn't take it. But when they threw me in, I met, I believe it was 24 other doctors, and they transferred me from prison to prison to prison. And I met many medical doctors who hadn't even had their day in court. One of them had been waiting for 10 years to have his day in court. And these were good medical doctors that had started practicing alternatively. And oh no, it's amazing. Usually they end up just dying in prison. In fact, the last few years, instead of putting the docs in prison, they just kill them. You know, 2 years ago down in Florida, there was 36. Oh yes, yes. Very mysterious, and a lot of them are like suicide, you know, but these are good people. They had no reason to commit suicide. In fact, oh yeah, these are just the people I know of. And I had 3 of them that I knew down in Florida. I knew them personally, and these were good, happy guys. And you know, they said, oh, they died of suicide, and I'm like, what? But quite interesting stuff. But when I was in prison, I ended up getting cancer recurred in my right humerus of my right arm, and I felt it start metastasizing into my bloodstream. And so I prayed and prayed and prayed, and Jesus came to me and told me that they wanted me to admit to at least 1 count of insurance fraud. They wanted my medical license, and they wanted me to pay the fine that went with that 1 count. Now, mind you, this is a Medicare patient, and the payment was $36 and some odd cents, and the fine and penalties and interest on that was $180,000, just 1 count. And so I called up my wife from prison, and I told her I'm ready to admit to 1 count and get out, you know, do whatever they wanted me to do, including give up my medical license. And they were listening, and the next day I got a call from the prosecuting attorney asking me if I was really willing to do that, and he wanted me to admit to all 156 counts. But I told him, you know dang well I didn't do anything wrong. I'll admit to 1 count if you'll let me out. And he says, well, we'll want your medical license, and we'll want you to pay the fees. Yes, Yes. Oh. Oh, okay. Yes. Yes. Yes, I will put protection around all of us. Call in the ascended masters, the archangels and angels, especially Michael, Raphael, Gabriel, Ariel, to surround all of us, protect us, and keep us safe. And also that we have all the ascended masters with us to assist us and talk of positive, good things. So the rest of the call will be positive and good. So, thank you for that. Thank you for that. So, yes, yes. And there was further training, which was cool. When I got back and out, I started teaching. I actually, what was really interesting was Maharishi, Mahesh Yogananda, the guy that started transcendental meditation here in the United States and the world, and taught the Beatles transcendental meditation. He came floating into a dream I was having back in 2011, and he said, go to Fairfield and detox my people. And it was fascinating because back then the chemical corporations had got it so that Roundup was being used on the plants and different things, and in southeastern Iowa, where Fairfield, Iowa is, where the transcendental meditation movement was, it started becoming very toxic because they had a lot of experimental farms there in southeastern Iowa, and Monsanto Corp is in St. Louis, Missouri, the world headquarters. And so I had learned about Monsanto because I actually moonlighted for a law firm that was defending Monsanto over Agent Orange and dioxin, but that's a whole other story, and I'm going to stay out of that because we want everything to be positive. But anyway, a company out of Ogden, Utah, called Systemic Formulas had developed a really good detox. And I had done the detox, and it had removed a lot of chemicals and toxins from my body. And when Maharishi came in this dream, I was like, whoa, what was that? And that morning I went to work, and this lady called me up from Fairfield, Iowa, and she said, Scott, I've got 18 women who want you to come, and we want you to teach us how to detox and lose weight. And so I was like, wow, this is interesting. Maharishi comes, and then this lady calls me. It was like a second witness to what I should do next. And so I made arrangements to go to Fairfield, Iowa. And I always, wherever I go, I give lectures about what's going on. So I gave a couple of lectures and did a lot of training there, and trained these women how to detox and lose weight. And a lot of them had parasites and fungus and viruses, because we get these things. And and we all helped them lose weight and to, feel better and detox. And so they were all very, very happy. And so they asked me to keep coming back. And so I started going to Fairfield twice a year to teach and put people on detoxing programs. And there was a lot of people there who were getting Parkinson-like syndromes and different neurologic diseases and early onset dementia, so neurologic problems. And a lot of these things were related to the chemicals and toxins that were in the environment and in the water and in the food. And so I started teaching people about this. And the first time I went to Iowa, to Fairfield. I stayed